And a pool, of course.
Yeah, I can understand why they'd want that in Norway.
That was 6.5 acres.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. I'll ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest. If at some point throughout the meeting you find that you do, please declare it at that time. Deputations, presentations, petitions, and public meetings. We do have Mr. Chris Ellis here today, the new library programs and service needs assessment. So if you wanted to join us at the table. We've set aside about an hour for the presentation as well as any questions from council. We do have a number of other things to get through today.
Thank you. Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me to present the findings of our work. We've been at it for several months now, and we're just basically wrapped up a few weeks ago, just after Christmas. So, my name is Chris Ellis. I'm coming from a company called Mass LBP. We're a public policy workshop based out of Toronto, and we specialize in making sure that people are at the center of public policies. It's kind of the short answer of that. We were tasked with basically building a snapshot of where the library is.
Sorry, if you can hang on one second. This is a new system we've got here, and I'm seeing people say that they can't hear. So maybe just pull the mic a little bit closer.
Better?
Is that a little bit better back there?
Say more. Say more. Say more.
Okay, say more. Is this good? Testing? Okay, want to make sure. Okay. So I'm here today to basically present the findings of a 3 to 4 month process where we were tasked with, basically tasked with doing a snapshot of where the library is now, but also figuring out where the needs and the gaps in the community are, as well as the needs and the gaps of the community to better inform kind of the planning for a right-sized library in the future. Okay. Now I'm not going to read through all of our slides here. I'm just going to go through them because we only have about an hour or so. Okay. So our process was different, or our strategy was different, and that's something that's a product of our company and the way we try to do business or work with people and communities. We try to actually go where the people, like going out into the community directly and actually going to where they're at and trying to talk to them where they're comfortable. We don't just throw a sign up on a gymnasium saying, come on out and tell us what you think. We try to do interviews and all sorts of things like that. In this case, we actually fielded a field team of 2 people that actually ran around Wasaga and interviewed people from anywhere between 15 and 45 minutes long. I can talk a bit more about that in a second. Okay. So that was our strategy. So generally what we did was we worked with community groups, other organizations, to then have them introduce us to their members, and then for those members to introduce us to other people as well. And in that way, we were trying to find a good balance of representation. So what that would mean to me is the right number of younger people, new parents, versus the right number of older residents, the right number of people from, say, the east side of Wasaga Beach versus west side of Wasaga Beach. And we did this iteratively. So we would actually talk to a few groups, see what happened, interview for more people, get introduced to other groups, talk to more people, and so on and so forth. So again, we met people where they were at, in Tim Hortons, in their own homes sometimes, after meetings if they were doing a knitting club, all sorts of things, as well as within the library. This approach worked quite well and was also buttressed with or supported by other more traditional kind of engagement approaches, such as an online questionnaire, very short, and a very extensive online survey, which could take someone between 20 and 30 minutes long, so that's 2 other things, as well as a series of workshops that we ran within the community. Okay. Kind of the key thing that we were really looking for was not for ways to have people kind of vote on their preferences, but to talk to people about their own kind of daily personal experiences, their wants and their needs in that regard. So how they live their lives within Wasaga Beach, what they're missing, what their own needs are within that kind of framework. And that means a lot of textual information. So when we were actually interviewing people, it was not like a clipboard with, questions 1 through 30, how do you prefer this, that, how do you feel strongly, this, that. We actually had conversations with folks, so unstructured or semi-structured kind of conversations around their expectations and their experiences within Wasaga Beach. And we were able to take all of that information and basically analyze it and use that for our work, which I'll get to a bit more in a second. Now, this is just a brief summary of how many people we actually talked to and engaged with. So we did about 110 plus, give or take, because some of the interviews were done with 2 or 3 people in a room, not just with individuals, of interviews that ranged from anywhere between 10 and 40 minutes long. So a conversation about 30 minutes long. I think the average was around 25 minutes or something like that. So we can get a lot of information out of people that way. It also gives us time to let them feel comfortable before they, I would say, divulge things that they might be a little bit embarrassed about. We're able to build trust with them so they can talk about the needs that they might have for their community, the needs that they might have for their kids or their spouse or other things that might affect how they interact with a library or other kind of community services. A little more anthropological if you can think about it in that regard. We did an in-depth survey. So this was an online survey with paper copies provided at the library. And what I mean by in-depth is, again, this is not a way for us to kind of map out preference by saying, I prefer this, this, or this. We're not creating wish lists for anything. But it was an extensive survey that was predominantly focused on asking people open-ended questions, again, about their lives, again, about their daily work, how they interact with the community, how they interact with other kind of institutions within Wasaga Beach. And again, we're looking for kind of an idea of their expectations and their experiences within the actual community itself. This was a big ask of people. One person that would, most of the people that had to fill this out, they'd have to sit down in front of their computer from upwards between, I think it ranged between 20 and 37 minutes long to actually fill out all of these answers, these questions. A good way to think about this in-depth survey is that it was almost an extension of the semi-structured interviews that we did in person with folks. And we did that to kind of expand that side of meeting people where they're at and having open-ended questions and conversations with people. In this way, more of a forum online to actually get people to tell us things that they typically might not. These questions ranged from where do you look for learning and development experiences in Wasaga Beach? Someone might actually say that they don't do that for themselves, but they have their daughter go to dance lessons and all of that. We might actually then ask them again, where do they get these dance lessons? And where do they have to find these things or these experiences? And some folks might say, well, we can get this here at the library, we can get this at the Recplex, or we actually have to go outside of town to do this. And this helps us kind of build this almost framework for what people expect from their community, what they need from their community, and where the gaps in the community are, and also how that overlays to planning a new library. So the next thing we did was, understanding that asking people to sit down and interact with an online forum that was predominantly writing was a big ask of people. We wanted to produce a more low barrier kind of entry point for people that are interested in the process, but might be busy with kids, might be busy with just general life stuff. So we did put together a questionnaire based on things like preferences and other things like that. We got about 535 responses. The plus is open because we left the survey open for a little bit longer. A school board finally got back to us and said they would try to share it. They've been a bit busy lately with strikes and things, but we felt it was a good opportunity to just kind of let it roll. So this questionnaire, predominantly multiple choice, or basically took people about 5 to 10 minutes. I think the average was 6 minutes to fulfill. We also did 3 kind of workshops or labs within the community. One of the workshops was focused on what I would say are kind of the civil society or stakeholders, members and leadership from groups like Probus, as well as someone from the provincial park came out, a principal from a school came out, as well as smaller groups that kind of self-organized themselves came in and worked with us to learn about the library, its current state, and talk about their clubs or their organization's needs in particular, but also to represent their members' needs almost as a proxy. You know, I can't say that we'll reach everyone, but these are people that work with people within their group all the time, and they hear things, and they're able to kind of pass that information on. They're also able to very specifically and concretely tell us what their group might need to better support their success within the community. Things like space and so on and so forth, more specific things to organizations. We also did a open to the public workshop, but preceding that we actually did a youth or student workshop where we had, I think it was about six high school students come in, and we ran them through a very similar exercise, deliberative, not participatory, where we actually asked them to learn about something first, specifically the library, learn about kind of Wasaga Beach, and talk to us about what their expectations, experiences were within the community. And then we actually asked them to act as facilitators for the general public meeting that took place a couple hours later on. So we actually had senior high school kids sit down with members of the public in groups of 6 to 8 to act as facilitators, as I acted as a facilitator for them. We did this for a few reasons. One, I wanted to pass some of the knowledge and experience that my company has to people within the community through facilitation and deliberative activities. The other thing I wanted to do was to kind of balance out this dynamic that I've experienced, which we can go into a bit more of, young and old within the community itself. And after the public meeting, we reconvened kind of the youth facilitators to ask them what they thought and kind of relate what they heard to the general community to what they need as youth. Okay. So I think across all of those workshops, we had about 70, 75 attendees, okay? Since I've arrived in Wasaga Beach, I've been told it's a very unique community in terms of geography. It's long and thin. I think this was the most common thing people told me over and over again. So I understand that kind of reaching people across the community was important. There was a lot of concern that we were only going to get responses or people participating from around the libraries, or around the library and the new library location, which are the two red stars, old and new. So here's a map of just the locations of the people that we had either talked to, that we actually had fulfill any of the surveys or questionnaires, as well as some of the folks that actually registered for the workshops provided their postal code. Ignore the dot in the water, it's a computer error and I couldn't solve it before putting together this slide, so not a houseboat. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, how do we do this? We're getting lots of text information, like hours and hours of interviews, tons of typed in text from surveys, and this is where I come in, and we actually are able to use things like machine learning as well as some artificial intelligence to help us tag a lot of this information and group the commonalities across the board from what we've heard, what the most important things are, as well as what the disparate kind of things are that people talked about. I then have to do all the manual work of reading through all of this and correlating it to other things and checking this work. But the end result is basically a group of common elements that we would have heard over and over and over again through the course of all of those interviews, all of the questionnaires, all of the workshops alike, okay? And after all of this, we start hearing the same things over and over again, even if we're doing interviews. And that's how we know we're getting somewhere, when we can already generally expect to know what people are going to say. And after all of the interviews and after all of the analysis, I can basically say this is if we went further, we would hear the same things. I think we reached a very good point in terms of engagement, in terms of representation, the people that we reached, the numbers and everything else. But in terms of also the in-depth portion of the engagement, the amount of time people spent with us, either on a long-form questionnaire or survey, as well as within, spending half an hour over coffee with us to talk. So, again, this kind of multi-channel approach, doing many different ways of reaching people, kind of helped us cover all of the bases is the best way to talk about it. This is how I know that we reached a reasonable level in terms of representation. So, I'm just going to check my time here. So, I'm going to transition into very briefly what I've heard and then talk kind of about what those commonalities of needs and gaps are. As you know, I've provided a ton of information in terms of reporting, and I'll talk about what those reports are and how to use them next. But you can read through all that at your leisure later on. I'm here to talk about kind of the final result and get to the nut of it. So generally, what did we hear? That participants, and I'm using that word specifically, I don't like saying the public or the community, I didn't talk to everyone. So the people that we did talk to, they want or need more diverse opportunities to learn and to develop within the community. Some people want this, and some people actually need it. And I want you to balance those two things out, okay? Participants also want and need these opportunities to be closer to home, but they're also willing to leave to get them. The number of people I've heard that basically say they just get in the car, pack the family up, and go to Collingwood and Barrie to do things there because they're just not available here was very common. And for me, I was very curious about that. I asked them a bit more about how long they spend in Collingwood and Barrie. They're doing their shopping there, they're getting coffee there, they're basically there for almost a half day and it's revolving around, say, a ballet lesson. That's something to also consider that's important. Participants want and need comfortable public spaces to learn, develop, work, and socialize. There are spaces available in Wasaga Beach, and people use them often. But what I've discovered is a bit of my own kind of bias, is that people are looking for more comfortable places. And this is not because they just want to put their feet up and have a cushy kind of chair to sit in. The way that I want to frame comfort for you today is around accessibility. We know we have an aging population. Comfort and age is an accessibility concern. If you're in a place that you want to watch a presentation for 2 hours, then the comfort of a chair and the ability to actually see that presentation is pretty important. Some people that are older might not be able to sit in that chair for an hour, so it has to be more comfortable. So I'm not saying comfort just for the sake of it or better, but around this concept of accessibility. Participants care about their community very much, but I've uncovered this idea that they're feeling kind of hindered in bettering themselves here within town limits. Programs are often filled. There are fewer spaces for them to go do these things, to enroll their kids at. Or there is a program, but it is out of town and they might not have a car. Or it's at different hours and they can't actually, access this program. They can't better themselves. And they're not, I would say, at the point of resentment or anything like that. They're not angry about this. They understand where they live and they love their community. I want to make sure that you understand that. But it is a hindrance in how they basically go through their lives, how they plan things and how they do things, okay? Participants expect more and point to surrounding places as benchmarks for what they want in their community. Again, if we ask people what they want their community or their library like, they're like, well, something like down at Collingwood, it's fantastic. We go there all the time. Something like over here in this other city or town, we go there all the time. That was another common refrain. And when I asked, why don't you do it here? We can't. It's either not here, too small, or something else of that sort. And this is not kind of a full-blown grass is greener thing, but this is a structural issue, I think, for families and residents to manage. And it's hard to do any one of these sorts of exercises without acknowledging that you're next to other cities and towns doing similar things, okay? So work products. So what did I actually produce, actual paper-wise, actual reports? So recommendations isn't really the best word. I'm not recommending you do these things and you just start building right away, but the things I'll talk about next are the commonalities that I've heard that I would recommend are things people are interested in as needs and could fill gaps. I've also produced a library profile that takes into account comparisons to other libraries, as it also takes into account staff interviews and me working with Pam about what the library actually does, as well as taking information from all the other engagement work in terms of what people see their library in terms of needs and gaps, specifically of the library itself. Below that, we have produced summary reports for each engagement activity with analysis, and these are more work material or a bit raw, so if you're interested in what's supporting these kind of recommendations, that's where you would go. So again, there would be a report for the stakeholder workshop, a report separately for the student workshop, another report for the public workshop, as well as for the short online questionnaire, the longer engagement survey, as well as all of the interviews. And that talks about the commonalities as well as has commentary from me about what I'm seeing, okay? So a little bit of context. You can't do this work without learning what are the most important or pressures are within any place. And, you know, this is pretty common to everyone who lives here. I've heard this over and over again, not just from looking at information and doing desk research, but out of the mouths of people that I were interviewing. Everyone has told me the population is growing and it's getting bigger, and it's something that is felt, and that's a pressure that's very important to acknowledge. Everyone else has told me is that, you know, the population is very different in that we have many older adults here than anywhere else. Much of this data was pulled from several reports pulled from the internet, which were posted through Town Hall. The other thing that people told me is that, and I've also found, is that, you know, there are more people with less income here and less people with more income here than surrounding communities in Simcoe. So it's something to just kind of acknowledge and understand in our work. Before I start anything, I really like to think about this idea of first principles. You know, what is the core thing that you know, the library is really doing? Like, what does it do within a community in the most broad sense? So a library really does provide community programming, community supports, and community space, or public space. Like, these are the core elements that it does if you really boiled it down. And if you align all of these together, you know, we have community space, and then we have community programming and supports to the side. And what this really means is that the library is not only just providing a place to go and be safe and to read and be comfortable, but it's also providing equitable opportunity for all within the community to either learn things, access books, or anything else. Libraries are very interesting in Ontario and Canada and elsewhere. You know, they're typically enacted by law. You kind of have to have one. And they're also really restrained by design about what they can do in terms of recouping dollars and cents. And this really relates to this concept of equity. They are there to fill in the gaps that the market cannot provide. They are there to fill in the gaps that government cannot provide. And they're to do so in an equitable way and to provide opportunities for all. And at the end of this, you know, you can't really provide this equitable opportunity without providing the space to do it in. If you don't have enough program space, you can't provide enough programs. If you don't have enough space to provide books or computers or anything, then it's a bottleneck. And therefore, you have to relate this idea of lack of space with this bottleneck of community equitable opportunity, okay? And that's a general framework that I'm basing a lot of this on. And I think it's logical and sound. The next kind of thing that I'm doing is that I'm not providing this information kind of willy-nilly. I like to create a framework for how I actually weigh through lots of data. And these are kind of my 6 guides, if you will. One is you can't do anything without supporting staff of any institution. They can't do their jobs if you don't support them. I don't know how many folks have been to the library lately, but you have staff working out of effectively closets. And they don't have enough space to do really great work. I think they're coping very well. They're doing really great work with what they have, but like you need to help make them feel comfortable, retain them, and provide them the support they need. Strong foundations. Libraries are doing a lot. They're expanding and doing tons of other things, but they have to focus on what they're good at as well, which is providing things like books and other resources, so you can't ignore that. The second kind of guide for me is future-proofing. You need to think about not what's needed now, but what's needed down the road in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And you need to make things flexible and able to cope with changes and sizable enough that you can grow into something. My thought about this is, you would never buy a one-bedroom apartment if you were just married and expecting twins 2 months after you moved in. You would be thinking about 2 years down the road. The next thing is fairness. Libraries are about equity, and there are some issues around fairness in terms of, I would say, representation and issues within Wasaga Beach. And it's not a problem, but it's a structural issue that needs to be mitigated. You have a lot of younger families that feel like they don't have enough for their kids, and you have a very large portion of older adults here. And it's hard to balance that out. I wouldn't want to be in your places to balance this very different community and figuring out how to service younger families as well as how to service these older adults with their different needs. But you need to find a way to be fair to all. This also relates to user sustainability, which I'll touch on a bit more in a second. You're always moving forward, and you always need to find new library users. You need to get them into the library and make sure they stick with you through the course of their lifetimes. That is true in business if you are running a shop. It's also true in terms of public services like libraries, and you need to be thinking about that. That's one of my other guides. And the last guide is really, I think, informed by a lot of the conversations I've had with you folks. Is just practicality. And it's also informed by a lot of the folks within with Wasaga that I've spoken with and that my field team's spoken with. People understand that they don't want the Cadillac of something, that they want something that just works really well and works really well into the future. So to be practical in decision making. I'm going to say one last thing, and then we're going to jump into kind of the recommendations. I'm just going to check my time. So this is something that came out of a lot of the conversations with staff as well as family members as well as older adults who use the library. I'm not going to go through it very specifically, but basically most people are introduced to the library as young kids, and they stick with it till they get into the school system, and then they kind of fade away. And only when those children become parents do they revisit the library. And it creates this kind of life cycle of people that use the library. And what's important about this is that you need to make sure that the library is built, or the planned library is built to really engage these young families as much as possible. And to balance that out, again, fairness is a principle with older adults in your other community. Because it is the source of new users, and it's the source of making sure that people are always coming to the library. I'm incredibly glad that you're matching it up with the Twin Pad Arena because of this kind of life cycle, but it also needs to be, I think, born in the plans for the new library itself. Okay. I'm going to talk about the commonalities of the needs and things that I've heard within all of the work that we've done. The first thing is to basically invest in staff space. No matter what you do, you need to make sure that you have enough space for staff to do their jobs. Simply put, in each of these sections, I've basically just listed my thoughts on the front, and then reasoning and kind of some very broad design considerations later on. The core of this is, again, working space right now at the library is teeny tiny. People are tripping over each other. There's no place to put anything. This is just straight practicum, they need more space to do their work. The next is really making sure that there is space for a larger collection. Comparatively to other libraries, population now or in the future, there are benchmarks that basically show that the collection and the types of things that the library is offering needs to be expanded to match population. That's kind of the core of this. But the other thing that I've mentioned in this idea of the collection or collection space is that it needs to be much more flexible for the future. Something you can't really see in this photo unless you look closely is that all of these library shelves are on wheels. You can move them around. You can create program space reasonably fast, very quickly. And this is deeply important to anything you do, this idea that whatever is built needs to be flexible so you can change it fast and adapt. Other people I actually talked to were other librarians about their experiences growing and what they suggested based on their own mistakes and what worked. And this was something that was strongly echoed over and over again, was that you need to build for flexibility. Build big, make it flexible, and then that will be adaptable as you go forward. This is a direct reflection of basically the life cycle of a library user. I think you need to really think about a space for young families. We've heard over and over again there is nowhere to go, particularly in the winter, if you have a young family that's warm, that's comfortable for the parents, and the kids can kind of burn off some energy, learn something, but also could be a flexible program space. This would invite different types of families into the library to then be converted into other library users or older library users as they age. This is, I think, one of the more important things that I've been thinking about. Next is kind of reflected of this idea that there's no free public place to go and hang out and be comfortable in Wasaga based on the folks that I've talked to. That something akin to a public lounge, which you don't have to buy a coffee for and sit there for an hour, is important to people, particularly in the winter. Again, people are happy to convene small groups, meet friends in the park, on the beach in the summer, but in the winter they feel isolated, particularly older adults, and this isolation is a social and health issue for them. This can also double, in a practical sense, as all sorts of space. It could be a place where, as council, you could have a fundraiser or something for something in the community, or another organization could have a fundraiser for, or you could do a launch for a new program. This could be program space. This could be a place where teenagers from the high schools outside of town meet to do homework. And it's easy. It's just create the space, make it comfortable, and let it be open. The next is based on a whole series of other things, but it boils down to two important ones. The library already has something akin to a classroom. It's called the boardroom. It's booked all the time. And you just need more of them, and they could book it more and more. The other side of this is groups and organizations want more variety in the types of spaces that they can access, and they're looking for something that is a bit smaller than, say, the Oakview room, a bit more comfortable, a little more cozy, and that's kind of the way they've imparted their need or want. The other thing that this supports is obviously learning and development. Young families to young adults to older adults, they're interested in learning outside of school. This came up all the time, either informally or formally. They want a place where they can learn something new. They can learn life skills, from how to do a budget to learning technical things like history or history or new math. But you need a good platform to do this, and this is basically public classrooms. One of the stronger proponents within the community is people that are interested in creative spaces, places where you could go do watercolor, You could paint and oil, you could program a robot, you could do a bit of carpentry, you could also do wood carving. And this is also something that's getting more and more common in libraries as well. But basically, it's something akin to a creative workshop. It doesn't have to be fancy, it's just a raw room with plenty of storage and workspace that can be highly programmed. This can also double as a whole series of other things. It could be an alternative classroom, it could be an alternative meeting space. But it's something that was very strongly prominent in a lot of the conversations that we had with residents. People, they want a place to meet with their friends and create things and do so locally. One little point of thing that I wanted to talk about is this idea that if you build it, they will come is not a phenomenon in libraries or anywhere else. If you just go and purchase a 3D printer, there won't be flocks of teenagers coming in. You need to really buttress a lot of these spaces with strong programming, and you need to buttress programming with strong engagement with the community and engagement with other groups within the community itself. That is the way that you can provide sustainable, robust programming for residents that's effective. Talent and heritage, I've kind of bundled these things together, and I've tried to create these bundles the best I can. It's a little, because things should be flexible, you should be able to do several things with any of the things that I'm proposing. So one other strong proponent is having a place to showcase local art, showcase art from schools, to also showcase heritage artifacts within the community. Some people went as far to say that you need a museum. I don't think that's the case. I think you just need showcases and places within a public space that people can learn and look at art. And I think that would be effective. Collaborative spaces, basically smaller workrooms were something that was also very important to people. Students in particular, you don't have a high school here and they need a place to work in quiet, maybe with a screen, plenty of power cords to hook up laptops, in a quiet area where they can actually do this kind of group work. Also, we heard from many folks that meet with, say, social service providers. They need a quiet, private space to have conversations. Also, businesses and other organizations cited the need to maybe do off-site interviews, human resources things that need to be private in a small room that is both reasonably comfortable and provides all they need. This was something that I heard about almost immediately, is this idea of a presentation space. And I'll list a few, I think, of my own personal caveats with this, and I hope they'll be helpful. Almost everyone we talked to, particularly in the older adult community, really wanted a place where they could go and see a public talk, to go and see theater, maybe a small concert, or have a school put on a small play, or a local theater company put on a small play. This was fairly important to people, and people leave Wasaga to do this. They go to places with these kind of public presentation spaces over and over again. And I think their expectations of the people I talked to were very wide. Some folks wanted something that was state-of-the-art and all of this, and I'm like, I'm not one to tell you what state-of-the-art is or how much that costs. I'm not that type of consultant. Other folks were just like, we just need comfortable chairs that are raked so I can actually see what's going on. Again, I'm older and I need to be comfortable if I'm going to sit through a 3-hour theater play or production. I think finding a middle ground in this is going to be the hard thing, but this is something that the people were very adamant about, that there needs to be a place to be convened comfortably within the community. And they associated that with the library, because they also associated these ideas of learning and culture with development. Again, kind of part of this library. Within my report, I also linked to this theater here, which is called the Al Green Theater, which is something I think someone should learn about in the community. It's a theater at the Jewish Community Center downtown Toronto. What I found interesting about this one, and this is the only time I got a little bit more technical than maybe I should have, was that all of these raked seats can actually be shoved aside like a giant bleacher area, which creates another learning space. My concern, and the only reason why I propose this, is that I would feel uncomfortable with this giant theater that might be empty a lot of the times, but highly active at others. Again, my guides of practicality, sustainability are kicking in. If you're going to do something, make sure it's always active all the time, or figure out a way to make it more flexible in other ways. Oh, there we go. An alternative space. This was not directly requested, I would say, but this was a product of listening to a lot of folks, particularly younger students, talking about a place that could be considered their own, but that is not labeled a youth center. I think one comment from an interview was kind of telling. It's like, if you want kids not to show up, please put a sign on it and call it a youth center. And it was very dramatic. It was something that I wasn't expecting someone to come out and say outright, but the idea was that students, particularly high school students, want to be treated like adults, but they all need a space of their own. And it needs to be a bit different. And this is kind of this idea of this alternative space. In this case, this, or at least the image of what you're seeing, can also be doubled as a presentation space. It can be an ad hoc presentation space. It can be a place just to meet, to see a small concert, to maybe even do an author talk or like a poetry jam. It can double as many other things for the community, as well as a place for youth or students to go and hang out and maybe study. Okay? But the idea of creating different and unique spaces within the library was also important, because people will interact with them differently. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to check something. There we go. Last but not least, and this recommendation will also come with a few caveats in my own mind, are this idea that this reoccurring idea of a community kitchen came up over and over and over again through the course of this engagement process. It was something I was not expecting at all. And we treated it a bit differently when we were talking with folks, because there are community kitchens in the community already. There is one at the local grocery store. There is one or two or three at the Recplex. So we were really trying to figure out what they were looking for. And even though I've stated that, people said they would want or cite as a need as a community kitchen in the community or the library, what they're actually, I think, looking for is a place that's programmed to provide kind of life skills around food, is really what it comes down to. And I'm still including this in my report as something that is cited as a want or need, because it was by participants, but I want to read through what they told me and talk a little bit more about that, and that I think they're really just looking for this idea of more robust programming around these things, and it's something that can be done elsewhere, but I'm still going to include it. Sorry, that was a bit uneloquent. We're going to skip to the last section, which is needs by program area. And these are needs and gaps that are not specifically anchored to a space. Participants really cited the library as a place they can go for help or support, no matter what it is, without feeling embarrassed if they ask it for it. Whether you are a wealthy older adult that doesn't know how to use their smartphone, or you are a lower income widow that just needs help figuring out how to fill out some government forms. This is something that was important to all participants, I would say. Not all, but the majority of them. They cited this as the library as a safe place that should be providing these supports and should continue so in a robust way. Participants were also very interested in different types of learning revolving around life skills, such as how to fill out tax forms for the first time, such as how to go shopping in a healthy way. Things that would help them better themselves in their personal lives. It was a common thread through the course of their work. And it was not just younger adults that were requesting this. This was older adults as well. I think one gentleman, his wife had passed on a year before, and he had never really cooked for himself. And he had no idea who to reach out to ask for help. And he was a little bit embarrassed. Another older adult that was... her husband had passed away, and she had never done taxes before. Her husband took care of it for like 50 or 60 years. No idea where to go. And there's no institution, no school that they can go and do that and find that information. And they're not the types of folks to go online and look this up. And they're also embarrassed a bit. So the library is this safe place to find these life skills. Student support. Again, there's no high school here. High school students need a place to study and to learn, but also to gain access to programs that might help them study and learn. Tutoring is something that came up over and over again. Tutors are very, very expensive, at between $30 and apparently $50 an hour, which I did not know, even as a parent. And they're not asking for free tutoring services, but they're looking for places that can provide support for those sorts of activities, and maybe some guidance around that. And the last is this idea of an information center. This also came up over and over again, in that people were having, or participants were having a lot of trouble finding things in the community. In fact, only after did we talk to them about how, a program they said they needed actually existed already, then they said, well, I didn't know about that. There was no one place where I could go to find that out. And they thought about it for a bit, and they're like, well, it would be really great to have a single kind of clearinghouse for all of the activities within the town that was run by almost as a public service. And a lot of folks actually mentioned that, this would have been easier to find things to do many, many, many years ago with more robust local news and journalism, but there is nothing that's kind of filled that gap in terms of connecting the dots. And I also think this is important because, as I've said before, I think you want all of your programs and all of your spaces to be animated as much as possible for them to be effective. So making sure people know where to go and where to kind of access these things is essential in making sure it happens. And I think, yep, that is my last slide. So I know that was a lot to run through. I've produced a great deal of information, and this was only the kind of the shortened version. All of the reports were sent over to you, and you'll see this build-up from raw kind of research and engagement to how we kind of filtered up to why these recommendations. And I've also illustrated why or what the reasoning behind them is, and trying to help you connect these dots. And as I've said before, I think you've done a very admirable thing as a community. Any other place, I think, would have not done this work so early on. They would have only done it after recommendations which were actually produced, and then there would have been a check-in with the community. And this is probably the best case scenario, in that you would have done this work prior to this and actually then moved through the series of stages that you need to do before you actually propose the type of building that the community deserves. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And Pam, did you have anything to add before I open it up to council?
I'm speaking with the board, and based on Chris's recommendations and reports and data that he's provided with us. The board and I will be bringing a report with our recommendations to council at a future date
Okay.
shortly.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Foster, as the rep on that board, did you have anything to add?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I have a few comments here. Certainly, I want to thank Chris and Pam and the staff and actually the board for the amount of work that's gone into this and all the participants. It's from a transparency point of view, this was a very active reach out to get the feedback. So it's been great work all around. Again, being probably the longest serving member of the library board, you hear from time to time that libraries are dying and there's nothing farther than the truth. The library not only is a resource for the community, but it actually it plays a role in if you look at the social determinants of health, things like social isolation for seniors, it improves improves their literacy, which can lead to better jobs, better everything else. So in the grand scheme, it improves the overall health of the community, the health and the wealth of the community. And so my only comment, and again, Chris mentioned this, there's things like flexibility and inclusive and the ability of the library to morph into different things as needs go. But when it does come to our table, when it eventually comes back to our table, I think that it's critical that members of this committee or the council as a whole remember that this is a long-term investment in the overall health and wealth of the community. So we have to look at this with perhaps an open mind. It's not just a building we're talking about. It's a big piece of the future for our community, and it's a 50-year plus asset. So we have one chance, and many people have said this before, we have one chance to do it right, and that's going to be coming relatively quickly. So I want to make sure that this remains top of mind, because and no offense, Chris, but the arena's okay too. But again, for this, thank you for everything, and that's my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Belanger?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a number of questions, and we haven't equated this to space recommendation yet. You referred to some of the uniqueness in our community, and some things weren't referred to, but when we talk about average lower family income, when we talk about a lot of jobs being related to the tourism industry, being related to the servicing of an aging population, these are not the highest paying jobs on the planet. We have one of the fastest growing 0 to 19-year-old age group in Simcoe County, and we don't have a high school for at least a number of years. And those things, when you get into equality and when you get into life skills and things that are not supported extremely well within the school system, but most parents would aspire to possibly have their children learn a musical instrument, become more advanced in a technology, possibly emerging skills, business skills, teamwork, those types of things. That becomes a factor of the library and their programming. And I think that's one of the uniqueness in our community is some of those spaces, that creative space, there's probably a larger square footprint required here than it would be in another community. I would say 90% of the time staff space was underestimated, or because of economic reasons was maybe not underestimated but underbuilt. And that became a productivity issue. I think it became an environmental issue to how well you enjoy working in the space and how productive ultimately you are. The other thing that notably was missing, and it doesn't surprise me because of the time that we're doing all these surveys, is that when we get into presentation space and the children's space, family space, we also have a significant number of short-term guests. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, a week. And they are going to, hopefully, we would build a facility that would add to the attraction of our community, that would give that visitor opportunities to have great experiences while they're here. And that wasn't really mentioned, but again, you did mention the flexibility and mentioned the presentation space, and that potentially it, could be underutilized if we didn't do it properly. This is another group of people that certainly can add visitation to a well-planned library, and significantly different than most communities. Like we're talking like 1.2 million or 1 million visitors a year, and we know if we had a better product, that could easily go to 2.5 or 3 million. So, and we're working on that. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray.
Thank you. Thank you for a comprehensive report. As a member, past member of the library board, I know I certainly fully supported doing a needs assessment. I think it's a shame to build this once in a lifetime, or certainly once in our lifetime building. If it's going to last 50 years, it needs to be done right. So thank you to Pam and the library board for pushing forward with it. I think it really is good information. I noted this week that Barrie just approved, I think it was $300,000 to take an old, almost an abandoned building and make it a creative space. And that proposal came forward from the Woodworking Club. So and it will become a creative hub within their downtown. So I really think that it's an important part of a small town, because I do fundamentally believe that libraries can offer opportunities to kids and to seniors that they probably don't have access to at home. And I think the further we are from the GTA and the big centers, we're not going to have everything the big libraries we've all toured have had, but we might have access to things that will open up the kids' minds and those opportunities, so that they know that they're out there, and then they can decide to pursue them, or if it's a good fit. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Kinney?
Thank you, Worship. I want to thank Chris and Pam, and definitely the other staff members and all the staff that have worked on this. And I think the slide that's going to stick in my mind, Chris, is the one that says supporting staff, strong foundations, future proofing, fairness, user sustainability, and practicality. Those 6 points, I think, is going to resound in my mind. And like Councillor Foster said, it should be something that we keep priority in our minds when we start walking down that road and building it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any final comments? Thank you both. Councillor Boulanger, one more?
Yeah, thank you. I just have one question. You didn't present it, but somewhere in the materials that I read earlier, there was obviously a concern on people in the western end of our community that they were potentially a little further from the library. But I didn't know if in the work that you've done, that in most communities, what the average travel time to a library would be. In a lot of our tours, I would have expected that, that 15 minutes is a pretty reasonable travel time, but I'm not sure.
The answer is I looked into it. There was no concrete rule of thumb or benchmark for this. In fact, other communities that had smaller branches, it seemed to be a product of, the church is closing, let's turn it into a library. So it was more, that's an opportunity, let's seize on it. So it wasn't as planned. The only place I know that there are specific geographic, almost formulas for that is downtown Toronto, with a very tightly controlled planning process. And their planning process for libraries is like 2 to 3 deep. It goes branch level, then district level, and then there's apparently something on top of, or even bigger than a district library, I don't know. And those are thresholds that are set off by population increases per, almost neighborhood. And that's the way they do it. The comment that you referred to was that, a library is not just about what happens within its within its walls, is that programming elsewhere can happen. I'm excited to actually see the bookmobile in all its glory, but that also means that, developing strong partnerships across the community to deliver programs is an answer for that. You don't necessarily need to, you can do pop-up libraries, like, you can be inventive with this. And the other thing I will mention is that, oddly, I was expecting to get a lot of flack about positioning of where you're putting them in the library. Didn't, actually. It only came up about 5 or 6 times, which was amazing in my mind. Finding places for things is very difficult in any community. You're never going to have satisfaction across the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
And then what new has come up that should be added to the list. And through those conversations, it's hoped that the various sections will be able to come back to Committee of the Whole as a group and go over those priorities, and then look at the 11 priorities that Council had established and see what changes should be made to these overall priorities based on a review of the detail that's taken place. So the format today is to the group to break out into the various sections. We've got 4 tables here. There's one just in behind there. We may commandeer that from our reporter, and use these 4 tables, the various sections, to start the review of the departmental priorities. Every member of council has provided in their report all the priorities from the various sections. We have chairs of each of the sections. Those chairs would lead the discussion, similar to last time, and the staff are going to sit with the sections and go through the priorities, what they accomplished this year, information we can. Members of council.
Okay, so the plan is we will break out. I'm just wondering, rather than them going out into the audience area, if one group at the end here, another group, and then those tables, I think there's probably enough room, and it's easy for the recording secretaries to type in things.
Yeah, maybe we can, one section can come down to this end, and we
Yeah,
can
this
split
end
that end.
That's all.
Look to see if there's anything that comes off the list, because it's either completed or if it's in process, and then consider new initiatives. Because like in some cases, there won't be dramatic change. These were all great priorities, so unless we've knocked something off. But I'm just wondering if there's a process that you recommended that's maybe more productive than another.
Thank you, Worship. Just on that, I think it's important to remember where we started from. So we have these documents that show what was created back in 2019. And I think as you go through your list, you could cross things off, but we're going to try to keep a master so that shows through a list what has been accomplished, because I think it's important at the end of the term to be able to say this is what we set for ourselves in terms of our priorities for this term, and this is what we've been able to accomplish. And I think those items will be saved. So for your own purposes, you can cross things off, but the list of items will be saved and there'll be new items added. And staff have some new items that have come up over the past year. There's some new circumstances that have arisen that may come up, and members of council may have ideas that where residents have approached them with respect to things that they feel should be looked at as priorities. So we need all that input into this process, and then from there, hopefully there'll be agreement on the new items going forward, but not forgetting the things that have been accomplished.
Right. Councillor Kinney?
Thank you, Worship. On a less important, maybe even a funnier note, maybe the master list should respond and reflect my correct spelling of my name.
Thank you. Yes, I did notice that actually earlier as well, so we'll get that corrected on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if everybody's clear on what we're supposed to do, then maybe we've got, this table looks like we have Development Committee over there. So we'll do that one there. We can do Community Services maybe over here, and General Government and Public Works. That works? Yeah. And I'll just float around.
We can take a minute.
You can take a minute, yes.
What did I miss? Sorry, gentlemen.
I was going to say, if you don't, I brought mine. Oh, okay.
All right, so who
I did bring
are we
mine.
expecting here? Just the,
Chair of Government Services, so she'll be leading that, but
well, I'm sorry, if general government's more important. She needs to come back.
the mayor may be circulating back here, so you don't feel overwhelmed or...
Yeah, I feel, I'm overstaffed.